Good morning.
Good morning.
Guten Morgen.
Oh, I don't know any German.
Schnitzel.
Heineken? No, wait.
Pretzel. Cheese. Wait. Pretzel and cheese.
I think I do know some German. I think we talked about this
Yeah,
on the
we did.
episode.
We
Ein
did.
Ei.
Uh,
Like one egg. That's the one phrase I
right.
know.
I don't know how to say good morning, and I need to learn some more good morning languages.
Yeah, I mean, didn't Apple used to open up with all the versions of hello?
It did. It just showed up on my new computer.
Oh, yeah?
I think my favorite one was hello.
Is that where's this?
Probably the Netherlands. I mean, right?
Yeah.
Kind of sounds
Yeah, I
like
don't
that.
know. It could be like Canada.
Hello. This one actually didn't have sounds, but that's the sound that I heard when I read it off the page.
It's probably accurate then.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
today it's Friday. So, hello.
Hiya.
Hiya. So, today is Friday, December 10th, 2021. Welcome to What the Hell is Water? I'm Reed Garcia, the founder of Helpful for Life.
This is Ryder Richards, guy who sits on the couch, drinks coffee, stares adoringly at Reed. If that's my adoring face.
This explains a lot about your wife.
Yeah, I know. I know. I think her eyesight must be going. Our relationship has gotten so much better.
Oh man! So speaking of relationships, yesterday we had on our for the second time Eric Wooten from Altered Marriage, and Altered is with an A, like a marriage altar, and he has a YouTube channel called Relation Shots. And yesterday we talked a little bit about personal responsibility. And we said, well, what is it? How do you get it? What do you do with it? How do you use that as a tool to make your relationship stronger?
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to make sure we pointed out, which we did yesterday, but I'll point out again, is when you hear the word relationship, it's very natural, at least in I guess my mind, or probably maybe American minds. I don't know, a lot of people's minds, to think about some type of romantic relationship. But one thing I want to make sure everyone recognizes that when we say the word relationship, it's just between two people. That could be you and your boss. That could be you and your mom. That could be you and your in-laws. It could be your brother.
Your
barista. Your co-host. It could be two people, and maybe in the future, you and an alien, or you and a dog. I mean, it's who knows.
Yeah, it's wide open future for us. Yeah. No, the relationship aspect is great because of course we naturally gravitate towards romantic partners, and I think we've brought this up before, but we are in a time period now where a lot of people think that their spouse has to be everything for them.
Right.
Just like it's friend, lover, support person, sounding board, it's really complicated now. Sometimes people need like a nurturer, so they need kind of like a mother or a father out of their spouse as well. And so it's just sort of like all things to all people. And that can be very complicated for a marriage. But yeah, we also talked about things like parental stuff, like how you deal with your parents, how you deal with your kids. So there's other kinds of relationships that we have, and taking sort of personal responsibility is basically knowing that you're the one that you can control. Eric said, I guess, you really can't control somebody else. And so if you're the only one you can control, he said he was actually happier when he found out that a problem was his. Like when he was the one having the problem, because then he can work on himself and he can control that. But since you can't control somebody else, then that's one of our defaults, is to blame other people for things.
Yeah, and we actually already had a comment on our YouTube channel point out one of the quotes that they really liked from that meeting, or discussion rather, which was, every married couple has a set of unresolved issues. You learn how to manage those while solving what you can. And so I felt like that was a very important point that I don't think enough people hear early on, much less at all, thinking that there's going to be some things that will eventually change or will eventually fix. And the reality is in any type of relationship, yes, some things may change and evolve in between them. But if you're expecting for everything to change, you're just setting yourself up for failure, and that means you yourself are going to get hurt, and likely that's going to hurt the relationship and potentially the other person as well.
Yeah, Eric was really great talking through the various things. And, I kind of liked how we can throw things at him and he can kind of make a joke of it and he can kind of run with it at the same time and be serious. Yeah, and he's got on occasional sort of bust out some of the psychology lingo. Yeah, it made for, I think, a really good episode.
Yeah, and you know what? Our viewers agreed. I just looked a few minutes ago, and we were at 88 views or 85 views or something like that, and that's just since yesterday. And so that was a I think our biggest spike in that short window of time. And maybe some of that's from magic and things building up. Maybe that's from the title and description. Maybe that's from people just really liking Eric. Who knows?
Right, right.
But
And one of my favorite parts there that we talked about after the show is Eric when he went off on his own love language, which was
yes.
sarcasm.
Yes, the sixth love language. I love that one for sure. And we're going to have a clip on that. I wanted to highlight one other thing that another viewer wrote in, which was talking about therapy. So we talked a little bit about therapy and how that's one of the pathways to help get someone outside yourself. Because one of the hardest things about personal responsibility is you can't always see the things that are going on with yourself or the things that you are doing to other people or the effects that other people that you're having on other people. And so sometimes it's nice to have a unbiased third party to help you with that. And Eric talked a little bit about how you can get some of that through community, through the people who not only do they love and care for you, but they're willing to call you on your stuff. And we pause for a second to point out that second part very often doesn't happen, where people are willing to call you on your stuff and give you that tough love is another phrase, right?
Yeah, yeah, and he was talking about, and this also, of course, hit home for me is that a lot of times it's easy to get sort of defensive when we're talking about relationships again, to not want to be the person that's being attacked.
Yeah.
And it's funny how tough love can feel like an attack. But I think as you get healthier, you start figuring out, no, it's okay. They can still love me, and we can still have confrontation.
And there's this magical thing that I think moms worldwide know, which is you can tell somebody something all day long, but sometimes they're just not going to hear it from you, you know? And sometimes, hey, thank you. And sometimes you need that second person, even if it's literally saying the exact same thing. If it's like, oh, here, let me tell you my side, my story. Let me tell you all that. And then the therapist turns around and says, like, yeah, you're being a dick.
Yeah. You're like, but wait, I thought I was always in the right.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
The thing that one of our other listeners wrote in was talking about, she's like, want to make sure to caution people as well on not giving up on therapy just because they don't necessarily get a good match with a therapist. It's kind of like we were talking about the other day with Alexandra. It's like, oh, you see one result that gets reversed or one study that gets, changed. And then you're like, well, I'm done with science. I'm never trusting science at all ever again.
As you talk on your iPhone to somebody.
Right. Right. So this viewer was kind of same kind of thing. Is like, well, just because you go to therapy and you don't necessarily mesh, there's a lot of different techniques. There's a lot of different, therapists are people too, right? Yeah. And so that's another relationship. And it's like, maybe that therapist just isn't hearing you. Maybe that therapist just doesn't vibe with your personality. And, yesterday, another thing we kind of talked about was how you can have traits that can build off of each other in a good way, or they can cancel each other out, or they could be really, really bad. And you can have two bad traits that really amplify one another. That can happen with your therapist too.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't actually even thought about that.
Yeah, therapists are trained, so hopefully those interactions should be minimized, right? And that's one of the things that would make a good therapist, would being able to treat a wide variety of patients, or at the very least be able to say, hey, yeah, I'm going to recommend you to somebody else for XYZ reasons, but yeah, so for their specific example, they said they went through more therapists than they could count when they were in middle school and high school before they found one with whom they were truly comfortable and were able to find actually effective therapy for me. And so it's just some encouragement for people out there who, hey, not only should you try this out, but just like a lot of things, it might take a couple of tries and a little bit of work, just like dating. Yeah, it really is, right?
Yeah, because it is a long-term relationship that you want to develop there. And maybe, sometimes you're just jumping into the first thing that comes by, and maybe that's not always the best thing. Of course, Eric talked about that too, how people find like coupled up dysfunction where their wounds are similar and they lock together. And so that's something else to sort of be cautious about, is that we're doing these things subconsciously. We don't know we're doing them, but we put ourselves into situations that will continue to hurt us because of the way dysfunctions work and coping strategies work. And then, that's one of the reasons for therapy, is to help yourself just be aware of it, maybe pull out of it a little bit. But yeah, I had some difficult advice about narcissism that's very tricky to deal with, very hard to deal with, and very difficult.
Yeah, so Eric went through a couple of examples where he said, "All right, hey, there is this person, Susie, and this dude Bobby or whatever," and he said, "Here's kind of some of the baggage that Susie came with. Here's the person that Bobby came with," and I'm making up those names, right? Those are not what he said, and then you said, "Hey, here's an example of how this could play out based off of how this person is struggling with one thing and this person may be struggling with another thing, and sometimes those don't work well together, right? And it's like that. Sometimes they're actually really pushing each other's buttons almost, right?
Yeah.
And how can you work through that, and how can you get past that?
Yeah, sometimes they're pushing each other's buttons, and sometimes it feeds into, like when he was talking about codependency and narcissism, like they sort of feed themselves into a loop where the narcissist is sort of selfish and controlling, and the codependent person sees that as love.
Mm-hmm.
And you just go, oh man, that's just a recipe for disaster. But people make it work. Like it is kind of strange. So yeah, that was kind of an interesting thought to think about too. And I've heard it said sort of that everyone's kink finds its match. Like whatever your dysfunction is, you will find somebody else, and and that's kind of an interesting idea. But when it comes back to therapists, then don't jump. You don't have to just stay with the first one you come into. I like that idea a lot. I've always kind of thought of it more like I was going to school, and this is your professor, and you just better make the grade.
Yeah.
And so I never actually thought about swapping therapists or changing out.
Yeah. So it's a very important thing to keep in mind because, again, like, just like learning a new skill or doing something at work or whatever, like just because you get that friction, you have that resistance, sometimes it's really worth it to push through to become stronger and get better at the thing or whatnot. And in this case, it's like, all right, try this therapist. And, remember, it's just like any relationship. You can't expect them in one meeting to solve all your problems. Like, you got to start telling them what's been going on. And also, if it's your first time at therapy, then you're learning a little bit what it's like, and maybe you don't know all the terms yet, and you don't have any idea what's going on with you yet. So it takes a little bit of exploring.
Yeah, how would the therapist know what's going on with you?
Yeah,
you don't know what's going on with you, right?
Yeah.
People expect a lot out of them. And I think, yeah, there's something about the more you reveal, the better of a handle they can get on it. But that takes time because oftentimes we're just lying to ourselves as well.
Right.
We don't even know our own problems.
Yeah, and then there's some things that happen even on a subconscious level as like you're starting to open up and you're starting to share. It's like, oh, okay, I talked about this, but then they asked me that one question, and I was like, I didn't really want to talk about that. It kind of made me feel weird, or, oh, maybe that was something I did that was illegal and I'm worried about getting in trouble.
Yeah.
And there's all these little small things that could happen, and also some of it's just like, yeah, I did that thing and it makes me sound like a bad person, and I don't want to feel like a bad person, and I want this person to like me,
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things that can come out there, but the main point is trying it out and keep pushing through that, because you're going to grow, kind of like the analogy you used yesterday, which was, have you ever talked to someone who's gone to Europe on a trip and come back? It was just absolutely horrible, and I've learned absolutely nothing, and it completely sucked.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I love how certain things get sort of discounted because we don't want to do them. But when you ask around, most people enjoyed it, or most people learned something about it. So, yeah, there's a couple of examples like that. Speaking of all that, sort of sidetracking a little bit, I'm gonna be going up to New York today. So yeah, it's another one of those places where I don't bump into a lot of people who are like, oh God, I just hate New York, unless it's like former New Yorkers.
Right. It's like a badge,
Yeah.
And
It's
then
like,
even
oh,
if, no,
well.
not even just former, it's like people who are there too. It's like, oh, I hate it, but I can't go anywhere else.
Yeah, right. But there's nowhere else in the world that's worth me.
Right. I bet you get a lot of that too at the art world. I bet there's a lot of overlap with New York and the art world.
Oh, there is. There's a ton, and I have so many friends. And the funny thing about it,
You have
too,
so many friends, man.
well,
I'm so proud of you.
I have so many acquaintances.
Okay, there
Yeah.
you go. There you go.
And those acquaintances will, if they've ever lived in New York, I think there's like a countdown. It's like 3 minutes until they have to say something about when I lived in Brooklyn, or when I really just for that 5 years in Park Slope, or for that whatever, or whenever I lived by the World Trade Center. Then it just automatically somehow slips into every conversation. Well, so and so has the best bagels. And you're just like, oh boy, here we go.
Well, and let's just point out how it really starts before the conversation even starts, when someone says, "I'm from New York," period, and it's like, okay, that's a state. Yeah, where in New York? And it's like, oh, you're just
It's
supposed to assume it's the city.
you are, yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, poor rest of the state,
I know, I know. They might have good things going for it. I just wouldn't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
is there anything else there besides the city? I don't know. I don't know. So, on a slight nerd note, I'm going to share with those of you who care about the nerd things that I like to add in here. So yesterday we were talking about constructive and destructive interference, and then I sat down to watch YouTube over breakfast, and one of the first videos that came up as my suggested videos was about a super heterodyne radio, which is a fancy way of saying like an old radio that came from a long time ago, that you would listen to AM radio, like, hello, what's the weather? And this is how we talk when we're talking about the weather. And in that video, he shows about constructive and destructive interference. I was like,
Oh,
I was just
cool.
talking about this. Thank you, Mr. Data Overlords, for listening to my words and suggesting things that I had to say. That's around 3 minutes and 20 seconds. If you guys are curious to see, he shows you actually what the sine wave looks like from the sound. And one of the things that he does is he puts these two sound waves, and he's got one speaker here and one speaker here. And he says, this one's at this frequency, which is at, say, 400 hertz. This one's at 401 hertz. And they're so close. They're almost synced up. They're almost perfect. But yet, once a second, they're off. And it produces this beat. It produces this destructive interference. And I was like, I just couldn't get over how great of an analogy I thought that was for relationships. It's like you can be so close to being on and being exactly in sync, but if you're off just a little bit, every now and then there's going to be some destructive interference, and that it changes for people, and just how far apart you are will affect that, and what kind of frequency you're at in the first place. Some people that's going to be happening 10 times an hour. Some people maybe that's 10 times a year. But I just couldn't help but really appreciate the parallel there.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a great example of how those things can kind of work. And then, the idea that they perfectly sync means that you would just sort of cease to have noise. It's almost the opposite whenever you sync up so well. But yeah, there's this other kind of thing that makes me start thinking about, with music or sound, is like getting into harmonies or scales or something like that. And so all of a sudden I started thinking of like cooperative systems that can become more than the sum of the parts. So not just, canceling out or sort of amplifying, but finding some other ways to do it. And that moves off into music. It's not really sound waves.
Music's everywhere, man.
It's everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's cool. And another thing too is you can see visually how it goes, and then you can hear it as well. And it's like, all right, listen, and you'll hear the tone, but then once a second you'll hear this. It's called a beat, and you'll hear it. So it's a really cool video. I encourage you guys to check out at least the parts of it. 3 minutes and 20 seconds is when he describes constructive and destructive interference, and around 2 minutes and 30 seconds is where he shows that beat. So that was yesterday, and I can't speak enough good things about it. I thought it was a really good conversation, and I think it's very important for people to go, and that led us to our challenge, which again I think I argued was one of the most, if not the most important challenges we've had up to this point. Do you remember what our challenge was?
Oh, I'll probably mess it up. It seemed like a little bit multifaceted, but part of being aware is like, or part of taking personal responsibility is being aware of your own stuff. But the problem Eric was saying was that we don't often spend enough time. And he was really recommending that you somehow find some time in order to sort of prioritize yourself and that personal responsibility and that awareness, so that you can actually then work on yourself, which could sync you up more with your relationship.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of my favorite things about that episode was just think about it in this way. And if you frame it in this way, I just find it really hard to disagree with, which is, if I say that I want to bring my best self to this relationship so that we can be the most successful together, you can be the most successful, I can be the most successful, like, why would I not want that, right? And so that's what this personal responsibility is about. It says, hey, I recognize there are things that I need to do to work on myself, and there's things I need to do to work on our relationships, and that there's things I need to do for you. And by taking that ownership and taking that responsibility, it can propel you to have a better relationship with everyone in your life. And that's why I really want to emphasize, this is not just your significant other. Like, this can change all areas of your lives. And there's one other video that comes to mind. It's a TED Talk by a guy named Jocko. I think we've mentioned it once before, and he's a former Navy SEAL, and I think it's called Extreme Ownership.
Yeah, and he's he's got his own podcast and everything else too. And so Jocko Willink, I
Yeah.
think is the name, and so look him up if you get a chance.
Yeah, we'll include a link in the chat here, and it's just he uses examples of his Navy SEALs day, and he applies it to everyday life, right?
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where somebody shows up to him and they're like, "Well, this and this went wrong," and he's like, "Great, let's solve it." And it's kind of like he just owns everything that shows up. This and this is a problem, and he's just like, "Yes, let's fix it. Go, go." And there's something really. It's kind of funny because we're in a society where we seem to be pushing things off, avoiding responsibility, and he just has the opposite idea. He's just like, take it on. It will make you better. It will make you stronger. Bring everyone else with you. Work as a team. Like he's just got so much good advice about that it's just something that we don't hear very often.
Hoorah, brother.
Hoorah.
Helpful for life. Well, today is Friday, December 10th, 2021.
Man, we're getting close to the end of the year, Reed.
It's close to the beginning of the next year. It's all about perspective,
You just moved. Yeah. No, I think this is the crazy part is we're going to eventually have to take stock of how we did this year.
Yeah.
We're actually going to have to go, okay, so I know this year only lasted, 4 months, but whatever. We're going to have to take stock, see what we did right, see what we did wrong, see if we want to be more productive, less productive, and what our priorities are.
Yeah. And, one of the ways to make sure that you're keeping in mind what your priorities are is scheduling your time out. And one technique you can use to do that is called time blocking. So we're going to talk about time blocking a little bit today, and we're also going to talk about tits.
That's the part I'm looking forward to.
Well, good. Well, for TITS, it's part of our "This is Technology" segment, which is an acronym for TITS. I don't know what you were laughing about.
No, that's a technologist always makes me laugh when I think about it.
Just a little chuckle.
Yes, yeah. I just think of all the hardware and the software and.
Yeah, that's good. It really gets me going too. I'm an electrical engineer. It's that's cute. That's funny. So let's go ahead and jump right in and talk about time blocking. So, what does the word time blocking mean to you, and what's your exposure to it?
Oh, I feel like I've bumped into time blocking just this year, and the idea being that you will block off a chunk of time to focus on something. One thing is usually the way I've seen it sort of described. So say I have an important task that needs to get done. Well, instead of letting myself get distracted by it, just go, you know what? You're focusing for the next 2 hours on this one thing and this one thing only. And this is how we're going to focus. I know you've got 37 other things to do. You need to feed the cat and, I don't, call your mom and all these kind of things, but that's not going to happen during this time frame. And so by sort of blocking off this chunk of time and telling yourself this is a dedicated time, I will now focus here. That's the idea that at least pops up into my head.
Yeah, and one way I've heard it said, which I think resonated with me, is setting meetings with yourself, right? And one of the things about time blocking is, so to, I guess, define it real quickly, is essentially you are blocking off part of your day and or week to do the things that you want to do the things that you have recognized are important and you have thought about and said, hey, here's what I know, or here's what I've thought about and said, this is what is the good priority right now. And, this has been one of the hardest lessons for me to learn. And as I was working with my business coach, I told him yesterday, I was like, look, I still haven't done the time blocking thing, but I know I need to do it, and I'm not putting it off because I know I don't need to do it. Sometimes it's kind of like marketing. You just need to hear something 15 times before you're willing to make that purchase.
Maybe your business coach has become like your mom, and you just can't hear it anymore. You need it from a third party.
Maybe I need another third party. Exactly. But no, so I've now made this commitment to do time blocking, and right after our meeting here today, I'm going to be time blocking out the rest of today. And basically, what that means is I'm going to go into my calendar and I'm going to make blocks for, okay, all right, this is what I need to do for this hour and a half, and then I'm going to schedule in some downtime and a break, because guess what, that type of thing, one, it needs to exist, and two, it's going to exist whether or not you acknowledge it, right? So another tip I picked up from my business coach was, and I've seen some other people do as well, is, when I schedule meetings, I only schedule them for 45 minutes. We leave that 15 minutes for the in-between stuff. Go get your food, go to the bathroom, have some time to decompress, or maybe write down some action items you got from that meeting. But the point is if you fully schedule yourself, scheduled time block every minute of the day, you're probably setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, it's a good point that we can't stay on all the time. I know we think we can, but our brains just don't work that way. Dr. Andrew Huberman on his podcast was talking about this just the other day, that we really do need dedicated time to focus and then dedicated time to rest. The problem is, even now during our rest time, we keep on fiddling with other things. So we keep distracting ourselves instead of resting. And the idea that I think Naval Ravikant said is that as knowledge workers, most of us are now working with our brains more than our bodies. And what we really need to consider ourselves as like athletes, where we sprint and then you rest and relax for a longer period of time, and then you sprint and then you rest and relax. The thing that we do though is we sprint and then we just keep kind of walking and meandering around, and we're sort of jogging a little, and we're never really dedicated at resting. And most of the time that means we're also not really sprinting that hard either.
Yeah, and that's the part where I think it's hardest to make that mental switch or awareness, is like, but I'm working, but I'm busy. I'm
Yeah,
doing
look,
the
my hands are
things.
moving. I'm
Right.
working.
And
Yeah.
and that's there's a big important distinction between, like, hey, just because you're doing work and you're staying busy, and even if you're quote unquote being productive, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are focusing on the most important
Mm.
things. And that's where again, as an entrepreneur, especially as a solo entrepreneur, that's one of the hardest challenges, is because I don't have a boss. I don't have deadlines. I don't have stakeholders who are needing this certain thing. I don't have clients that I'm delivering a product to that has specified, oh, I need ABC by X date. So I have to inherently decide all of that myself, right? And decide, oh, this is what I'm going to do. Here's when I'm going to do it by. And that's been a very big process and a learning process for me, because that's the first time I've ever had that happen before, right? You start out with your parents, right? And then you kind of go to school and you've got syllabus and rubric and
Mm-hmm.
grades, and it's all very well defined and well structured. And then I go to college, same kind of thing. Then I go to work, same kind of thing. You got a boss, you got deadlines, all this stuff. Well, when it kind of go out into the open all by yourself, like, oh, you're gonna start a company, all right, go, good luck. And it's like, oh, now what?
Yeah, yeah, that's, when we're talking about some of this, then the art world was different because you had to base things around getting shows. So you would develop everything around these deadlines, and usually those were dictated by somebody else, but you could sort of work into them. And there's those kind of things that happen. And then as a professor, I always had, you work in semesters,
Mm,
and and so your whole being exists around these little time block schedules that are developed by somebody else. And then, yeah, whenever that kind of ceases and I started things like my own podcast, then it does come into the same thing you're talking about, is how often should I put out a podcast? And I talked to some business coaches and they were like, well, at least once a week, and it needs to be this length of time, and it needs to be this, and it needs to be this. And then I tried that. It was really, really exhausting.
yeah.
And I was just like, I don't think I can maintain this and hold down a day job
Yeah.
and do everything else I need, right? Because this is the other problem with all of this that we don't really talk about enough, is that you do need time blocks for your other priorities, such as your relationships.
Right. And that's really where the value of time blocking comes in. It doesn't it forces you to not have any excuses. It forces you to deal with the reality of what it is. And so that's why it's so important, is because it says, all right, look, you've got, the rest of today, right? So realistically, let's look and see, okay, how many hours do you have where you're actually working? So let's
Mm.
go ahead and jump over to our screen here. So we're still figuring out the best way to do this whole screen sharing thing. So bear with us if it doesn't look too great. We will get better on that. But if you're on audio only, you can go find this video on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or Twitch, and you can go find us on there, Helpful for Life, and we'll include links to that in on our website. Oh, well, maybe not. I'm trying
There
to
will
figure
be
out what we're
links
gonna pause
somewhere.
to.
Yeah.
We'll throw the links in the chat at the very least, in the description. So, anyways, back to time blocking. So the thing is, you get to look and see, oh, well, just how much time do I have left in the day, and what can I realistically do? And so here, this is just the regular stock Apple Calendar app, and of course, you can get into whatever app that you want. Um, oh, we got one of the mics muted. Sorry about that. All right. Sorry about that. Muted mic with
Oh.
technical difficulty. But what we have is a red line here that shows where the day starts, and this is Apple Calendars. And so within the calendar world or within anything, you can way dive down into all the tools, and you can find out all these cool things to do, and you can geek out on this, and all these things, and it can be one of the traps you can fall into, right, within productivity.
Yeah.
I know it's one I've done myself, where it's like, oh, you spend so much time figuring out the process and the tool and the thing like that, and it's like, well, dude, you still haven't done the thing. Have you ever done that before?
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean it's it's so funny because there is a way that we get to not be productive by, discovering all the systems for productivity. It's this nice little catch 22 in there. Well, if I just fix this system a little bit, then I can finally actually be productive. So yeah, you can dive into these little rabbit holes, but it doesn't actually get you anywhere sometimes.
Right.
Sometimes it can, and you can block off time for that. But first, do the blocking thing.
Yeah, so I'm going to just go ahead and get a lot closer to this. No, I can't do that because I don't have my mic. We're still figuring out this whole thing. But so the way the time blocks work is basically you schedule these meetings with yourself, right? And one of the big traps people fall into is they do the time blocking. They put the thing, I'm going to do this, but then they don't protect the time block. Because it's with themselves, that's the first thing that they let go. And so that's some of the biggest advice when it comes to time blocking is protect your time block. And that's why I said I like the term meeting with yourself, because if somebody says, hey, can I do this? Or are you going to do this? Then you say, no, I'm busy at that time, right?
Yeah.
And you got to protect that time because you decided ahead of time that's important to you, right? And that's important to point out that does not mean you cannot be flexible and you cannot adjust. But by having the time block, it's the trigger, the thing to make you think and say, hey, is it worth me doing that? And if I'm going to shift this thing, is there going to be time? And so as you can see here on my screen, I've got roughly, half this day marked out. And I've got a couple time blocks here, which are named whatever. I can't even read the text, to be honest, from here. But then there's a little bit of gap in between the time blocks. And then you have the rest of the day. And then so you're looking at the day and you say, okay, I've got, let's say I have bedtime down here. I've got this much time left in my day. What am I going to realistically be able to do? And so one of the things is, I'm going to have dinner, right? And maybe that's going to involve cooking, cleaning. Maybe there's kids involved. So let me go ahead and block that time off. Well, then there's also this time where I just want to relax, right? And I want to, maybe I want to watch some Netflix. Maybe I want to, watch like a bunch of What the Hell is Water episodes.
I mean, that's what I do with my spare time.
That's all
I just
do.
watch myself.
Yeah, exactly.
I just keep finding clips of my face and pausing on them.
Yeah,
and be like,
and
that's
just
my
smiling
face
and
on the
staring.
internet.
Yes, and so maybe you want to schedule in some of that downtime because I was doing this exercise the other day with one of my clients, and I'm like, all right, dude, well. You got this time for your kids. You got this time for your wife, your lunch, your dinner. Where's the time for you, right? And as you were pointing out, it's important to schedule some time for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so as you're doing the time blocks here, and it inherently requires you to do some of this prioritization. And you can now see, all right, I've got this gap in my schedule. What am I going to put into this gap? And so then you look at the list of things you've got to do, and then you say, okay, this is the thing that I need to do that's most important today. However, one of the things that time blocking also helps encourage you to do is balance those things that you recognize you want to do that are medium term or long term.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy, especially in this day and age, to get so focused on the short term and like, what am I doing today? What am I doing this week? Somebody's yelling and they need this. There's this fire burning over here. I got to do this, right? Oh, pinging me on Slack, pinging me on email. Ah!
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is one of the things that as you were talking about this, I was thinking to myself is like, I do a version of time blocking which isn't even intentional really. It's I have turn off all notifications on everything and I minimize everything. Like I can't think to myself that I am important enough in the world in the grand scheme of anything that somebody needs to get a hold of me within the next hour.
Right.
And so what that allows me to do is then focus on if I'm designing something, if I'm building out something, if I'm in the back end coding something on a website, then I need some focus, because jumping out of that is like switching languages, and it switches the way your brain functions. So I just am like, nope, I'm not going to care about this. So I do the thing that is like, I only check my email a couple of times a day, and I try not to get addicted to those kind of things. So that's a version of setting yourself up for success, but it's even better when you know that you have that chunk of time. One of the things that we haven't talked about too much, but I need to basically make a forward for some of the texts that I've written. And the thing is, that's been on the calendar to do for a month. Well, why am I not getting to it? Because there's always something more pressing. There's always getting to inbox zero. There's always something like that that I feel like I need to be doing, which feels productive, but probably isn't.
Right. And there's this term called productive procrastination. And that's one that I myself struggle with a lot. And I think admittedly is also a little harder as a solo entrepreneur, because that prioritization becomes so difficult, because there are all these things to do, right? Every day now I create this list of like, oh, I need to do that, I need to do that, I need to do that. And there's just literally no way I can get to all of the things. And so then you have to prioritize and you have to choose, and you have to make sure, okay, I'm doing some things for today, and I'm doing some things for the short term, and I'm also doing some things for the long term. And one of the ways that actually impacted me in a negative way was, hey, I actually got 2 heads down when I was building this course, Kickstart Your Kitchen. And I was so focused on building the course and creating the content and doing the research and filming it and editing it and all that kind of stuff. Well, then, we talked about it with Hunter a week or two ago, and it was the go in the cave method. And then you come out of the cave and you're like, my precious,
look what I have made.
Don't you want this thing? And then people are like, who are you?
Right,
Why would
right.
I want that thing? And it's like, well, okay, that was a big lesson for me. It's like, all right, I needed to be doing some more work in parallel, where I'm developing the marketing, where I'm providing value in other ways, and I'm encouraging people and exposing them to brand and things like that. And so that's one of the things that time blocking can help you do, is like, all right, maybe out of your time blocks this week, let's say you got 20 chunks, 20 hour-ish chunks, hour and a half chunks that you have during the week. Well, then that is 20 times where you're like, all right, this is the thing I'm going to focus on. And maybe 17 of those are in the short term, but then maybe 2 of those are for the long term and one's for the medium term, so you figure out what exactly that looks like for you, what that balance is. But by thinking about it ahead of time and deciding ahead of time, you say, hey, all right, well, I'm going to have, this percentage for the short term, but I'm intentionally putting in this percentage for the longer term to make sure that those things happen.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the process that goes through as you're figuring out what's going to go on your time block here. And we're gonna go more in depth into time blocking on another day as well, especially when I can better see the screen and we can talk about and put some real examples and things like that. But I think that's where we might put a pin in it for today, unless you have a couple other points you'd like to make.
No, there's a guy that's written a book recently that's something called like 4,000 weeks. And the idea is that you only have 4,000 Sundays, 4,000 Mondays, right? So you only have so many of each one of these days. And the idea is, what are you going to do with them? And the funny thing about it is, you would think that this would just be another optimization productivity hack book,
Right.
about like, get after it, but he actually sort of tackles it from some different angles. A lot of it is about really finding what's actually important to you. And the idea that we value time as a resource is a very bizarre notion unto itself. So our culture is built around, of course, using you and your time. And attention economies also take your time. And so we have all these kind of forces that are fighting against us. And so in an interesting way, because I think productivity became a big deal during the pandemic, I don't know, a lot of people were really getting interested in it, then there's also now been pushback. So there's been some books coming out that are talking about really prioritizing more important things, or figuring out what that is, because the problem is, with things like time blocking, productivity, and optimization, is your metric becomes about efficiency. And oftentimes, efficiency is not about the things that make you really human. So maybe we'll throw a link to that into the chat as well, to check out. There's an interview by him that might be really compelling for you to watch.
Yeah, and one more time for the audio listeners.
Oliver Berkman is the guy's name. The book is something like 4,000 weeks. I think it's 4,000 weeks. And it's really kind of a different take on optimization, productivity, and time hacking. And one of the things that he talks about is this kind of problem that we run into when we're trying to be super efficient is that there's always a system that we think is in place. It's going to make us very efficient, but it's just around the corner.
Right.
Within a couple of weeks, we're going to have the system down. Within a couple of weeks, we're going to have the system down. And all of a sudden, years have passed and we're super efficient, but we've also filled our time and days up being hyper productive, which means that then more people rely on us to be productive, which then continues to fill up our schedule. So we never actually get that time that we thought we were going to get by being productive. So there's this kind of loop that happens there that creates a kind of paradox.
Yeah. And not exactly that, but I can certainly relate to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was around this time last year and maybe early January this year where I had this realization. And I was like, oh crap, like look what I've done. Like I've gotten too narrow-minded. I focused too much on the thing I was doing and really heads down on that. And I missed these other things. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I make sure to avoid that I'm not dropping all of the balls that I've decided are important to me and in my life? And some of those are work related, some of those are personal related. And you know, some people may laugh or roll their eyes at me, but I actually have scheduled time to check in with friends, you know, and I have a friend who is like, hey, like, you know, I value our relationship, and we don't talk very much ever since we moved away from each other. Like, I want to check in with you and have some conversation with you. And, you know, it's easy to say that and be like, oh yeah, we should chat sometime, or oh, we should hang out sometime, right? But the difference between that actually happening or not oftentimes is scheduling. And it's and especially in this day and age, at least for me, and I think this really is true for a lot of people, is if it's not scheduled, if it's not on the calendar, it's not going to happen. Like, you can have the best intentions, but it's not going to happen if it's not scheduled. And so that's why I actually have a recurring invite with one of my friends, like, hey, every 2 weeks, you know, at this time, let's have a phone call. And sometimes we chat and it's 5-15 minutes and we got other stuff going on. Other times we chat for an hour, 2 hours. Sometimes maybe we play a game. And other times it's like, hey, we're busy today. Can we shift to another time? Or maybe we'll just skip this week or whatnot. But having that on there, it's like, hey, at the very least, I know we're going to at least think about each other and at least maybe text each other. And then most time, we're going to have some conversation.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, it tends to be that I only become a really good friend whenever somebody's in need.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's just the way the world, your focus shifts, priorities shift, and once somebody needs you, then it's easier to prioritize them. But sometimes, the daily, the sort of weekly or monthly maintenance is also really important.
Right. And it ties right in with that idea we've talked about a handful of times on here, which is preventative maintenance, right? And hey, maybe actually, if we're just going, oh, here and this person in need, here and that person in need, here and that person needs, versus, maybe talking with these people on a regular basis or engaging with them on a regular basis, then hopefully maybe those people wouldn't be in as much need. And obviously that's not true in all cases, right? But that's one way it could potentially help. But another thing I think is important to point out is you don't need to have that level of relationship with everyone in your life, right? And that's up for you to decide. Like, I think it's perfectly fine for someone to say, oh, we'll hang out sometime, and then never actually happens. Like, that's fine too. Like, you have those relationships with people. But if you have a relationship that you decide is important enough to where you want to be intentional about it, we've had Eric on a couple times. One of their three pillars are intentionality, community, intentionality, and personal responsibility. So if you decide that you want to be intentional about your community and take the personal responsibility to make it happen, then that's when you can schedule the time to make it happen.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. So with that, let's, my coffee cup's a little empty.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I know.
And you spill it again?
I think we're going to give a quick 30-second break here. We'll have on a little bit of peaceful music, and we'll be right back with our tits. And we're back.
All coffeeed up.
All coffeed up. Oh, cheers. Cheers to that.
Yeah, I'm gonna like.
Yeah, do it over
away
the
from
net.
the electronics.
Good call. So, I guess before we jump into it, we should, do our little intro thing. It's like, all right, on the count of three.
Good morning.
One, no.
Oh.
1, 2, 3.
Tits.
Welcome to Tits, the segment where we don't have an intro yet, but
That was it right there. Shh.
Yeah.
Keep going. Just roll with it.
Yeah. So this is Technology Stuff. Welcome to This is Technology Stuff, the segment where we talk with you about technology stuff.
Yeah, and these are user questions.
They are
Or
user
audience
questions. Audience questions. So if you want to be on our tits, then you just need to contact us. So go to helpfulforlife.com and hit the contact us button in the top right to let us know your technology question. Because as an electrical engineer and as a writer, we can tell you some things about technology and we can explain some things. And, a couple of the things we talked about on our previous tits were Wi-Fi. We talked about, hold on, let me actually go ahead and jump over to the, nope, that's not the right button either. We're just compiling there we go. Here we are. So here's my iPad screen, and you guys can see some of the drawings we had from one of our previous tits, which was talking about Wi-Fi and routers, and we talked about when should you get a mesh router, something like a Netgear Orbi or an Eero or a Google
One?
Wi-Fi,
Nest?
Google Home, Nest. I don't know what their names are.
Whatever. There is a Google one that's been highly rated lately.
Yeah, and so we talked a little bit about the difference between a modem and a router. We got into how actually information is sent, over the wireless signals. And we talked about, what is the difference between 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So that was one of the ones we talked about with what is wireless. And then today, do we have any other tits? Was that the only one we've had so far?
We talked about earbuds stuff, but was that another one?
I don't remember if we had named it tits at that point or not, but we did have the other technology discussion. That might have been a go as writer and read.
Yeah.
But and regardless, since we're talking about it, we had a segment where we talked about noise cancellation, and coincidentally also involves destructive interference, as we were talking about earlier today. But talked about the difference between noise isolation and noise canceling, and when we talked about some of the things that could help you decide as you're trying to choose some earbuds or headphones, especially if you're someone who's doing work on loud equipment like a lawnmower or something like that, or you're trying to block out the plane noise.
Right, because blocking out sound is not actually, there's the sort of the interference of noise cancellation really isn't blocking out sound. It's just putting more sound into your ears, and so that can actually be damaging if you're on something like, if you're trying to block it out, something like a lawnmower.
Right.
Instead, you'd be better with something that is like reducing the sound from getting into your ear, rather than trying to just block it out.
Yeah, we had a viewer write in with that one, and he said that he was on a lawnmower and he actually developed tinnitus, a ringing in his ear. And he was like, I realize it's because I have my AirPods jacked all the way up, and it's because he had the regular AirPods that don't have that seal around the ear, so it's not as noise isolating as some of these other headphones that we talked about, and therefore he had to crank up the volume in order to be able to hear it, which now has damaged his ear. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen to you guys, so you can make sure to check out that segment. We'll include links on that, if not live in the chat, later on in the description. So without further ado, let's get to our tits for today. We had a question about lighting at the house. It's like, hey, I'm going to buy some light bulbs. Like, I used to just buy a light bulb. Now there's all these choices.
What do you do?
And it's
and
I have
some
no.
that are very expensive and some that aren't. And I guess I'm assuming we're talking about not fluorescence, but just the regular kind of bulb that you would screw in.
Yeah, well, so there's a handful of different types of bulbs, right? So, first off, let's just see how Reed's drawing skills are, because he hasn't drawn in a really long time. Oh,
is that a tit?
No, that's yep. Drawing skills aren't great. Yep. There's a light bulb.
You have to make sounds like Reed grunting. He's trying so hard.
There's my beautiful light bulb.
There you go.
So
nice.
Yeah, so this is kind of what I think of when I think of a light bulb. Is something that looks like this, right? And it's got the two wires in between. Holding it up, and then it's got the little spirally thing in the middle. So yeah, it looks a little more like a light bulb with a little bit of context, right? especially for why have writer the artist draw things when we could have me draw
No,
things.
no. I only draw on paper.
Yeah, oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, only on
Super
paper.
snobby.
Only on paper number
It,
5 with
yeah,
the
actually,
ink.
Stonehenge paper
Yeah,
is
oh, see.
the lowest grade I will go. Normally, it's BFK Reeves, but
I'm so glad to hear that. There are actual terms for these things.
yeah. I'm sorry, I can really geek out
Oh
on
no,
paper.
good,
Yeah.
good. So when it comes to light bulb, this is kind of what the typical light bulb is. It's basically a hot. It's literally all it is it's a wire right here, and it's just running electricity through that, which heats up this really thin wire and makes it emit light. Coincidentally, when we were talking about Wi-Fi and stuff, that is actually light as well. This is the electromagnetic spectrum as so well clearly drawn, and in the middle there is visible light.
Yeah.
And so when we were talking about Wi-Fi and stuff, that was somewhere over here on the spectrum. I could be wrong about where it is, right? But
Yeah.
when we're talking about visible light, that's here in the middle of the spectrum. And so with that light spectrum, that's just heated up wire. And so this is what's called an incandescent bulb. And so when you go and buy one at the store, before, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, that was basically what you would always buy.
Yeah.
And they are still very, very cheap because they've been mass produced for so long. They're very simple things to make, and they've been well understood for a while. You can get them super cheap. But the downside of incandescent is that they're going to burn out more often. And so now there's been a handful of different types. There's the CFL, which is a compact fluorescent lighting, I think maybe what the L stands for. And then there's, the fluorescent tube lights, which you'll see a lot of times, for example, in a school or a hospital or maybe underneath your cabinets, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's LED, light emitting diode, right? And LEDs have, been more and more prevalent over the last few years.
Yeah, it's like the technology's finally caught up. They used to be pretty expensive. Now they're in absolutely everything. Like you can buy hats with LEDs in them, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Right? They're
and
everywhere.
It used to be something like, I don't know exactly, but let's say 50 cents to $1 for a light bulb, an incandescent bulb, and then like an LED one was like $8 or something like that. And it's like, wow, that's quite the discrepancy. And I don't know the exact prices right now, but it is a lot lower discrepancy now. And then the real big benefit of LEDs is that they use a lot less power, and they last a lot longer. So you don't have to replace them as often, right? And
And I think that's part of it now, is that I remember we just used to have stockpiles of incandescent bulbs. And it was about once every 2 weeks, a bulb would go out somewhere in the house and it'd have to be replaced. Now we have bulbs that last for years and years. And it feels like they last 10 years at this point, which is kind of crazy. And then, of course, they're all sucking in less juice, and there's all these kind of ideas. But then we could go, when it gets even crazier, we start getting into things like smart lights. So when we really want to get into technology, like, it keeps on going. So, yeah, back to it. I'm just digressing here, thinking about where I'm going to take my house next. Like, should I go for smart light bulbs? Should I go for LEDs? Or are these little compact fluorescents probably where it's at?
Well, all I'm thinking about is a Disney Channel movie called Smart Home, which was back in the mid-90s, and I don't think it had anything to do with lighting, but it was the classic AI running the house kind of thing, and that just popped in my head for fun. So for those of you, especially millennials out there who recognize Smart Home, maybe go watch that again. I don't know if it's on Disney Plus or something like that. Smart house, not smart home. My bad. So this is what an incandescent bulb looks like, and they've now made the LED bulbs to basically look like the same thing, but they don't work with that same kind of wire situation. And I'm not going to go too much into how they actually function. We'll focus more on the differences between them. But when it comes to light, or anything electronics, one of the most important things to know as you're choosing things is how much power is it going to use, right? And so when you have power, which we represent here with a P, there's an equation called P equals IV. And power equals current times voltage. And with current, this is what it's measured in amperes. Also said as just amps, and sometimes you'll see it as just an A. Voltage is measured in volts, like a Chevy Volt, and it's also represented sometime as a V. Power is shown in watts. Like Alan Watts? Is that one good
Yeah,
for you?
yeah, Alan Watts. By the way, we should do a whole segment on Alan Watts at some point.
Oh, I
Yeah,
like that
yeah.
idea. I like that idea. So yeah, so you have power equals current times voltage, and if you're looking, you're like, Reed, this looks like an equation in school and math. Well, yeah, this is an equation in school and math.
Yeah,
So you'll have
but
to
all
hold that.
this does show up quite a bit.
It really
Like,
does. And,
yeah.
probably the most common thing that you can apply this to is your phone charger. So even if you're zoning out, you don't care at all about lights, listen right now to hear about how you can understand a little bit about the power equation to help you choose the right phone charger for yourself. So, and this is great for Christmas gifts and things like that. So power is watts. So let's take a common example of the phone charger. So often with the phone charger, you have the plug, the wall plug, right? And if you look on that wall plug, you'll be able to actually see, input, output, and you can see these numbers. You can see watts, you can see amps, you can see volts. And by doing that, you can calculate what the power draw is. And more importantly to you, probably, you can see how fast that thing is going to charge your phone. And so with, let's say, it's gotten a little more complicated now with fast charging, but in general, when you buy an iPhone, right, they give you the little brick. They give you, it looks kind of like this. It's got the one, USB port, and it's just a cube, right? Well, guess what? Classic Apple, that thing's not going to charge your phone as fast as it can be charged. So of course that's what they're going to give you. And what this thing is this is actually a 1 amp charger. So that will allow you to pass 1 amp to your phone or whatever device you're trying to charge. However, a lot of phones can be charged at like 2.1 amps, and some of them can be charged even higher than that. And so if you plug this into our equation up here, let's just say we've got let's just stick with 1. We'll start with the easy math. So 1 amp, that's what we have. And then there's voltage. So anytime you're dealing with USB, it's going to be 5 volts. That's just like an industry standard. It's called 5 volts. That's what USB does. And so 5 volts times 1 is what, Ryder?
Ooh, 5?
Nailed it. Good job.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. And so what you can get instead is you can get a charger that does up to 2.1, and that's a very common thing, and that will get you up to closer to 10. We won't make you do that math. So
10.5.
Oh my gosh, dude, he's
what on fire.
So it gets you to about 10. So that's going to give you twice the power that you'll be able to get from that 1 amp. And so when you're looking at these chargers, you want to see, okay, is it 1? Is it 2.1? Or you might even see 4.2. And that's often because you get one of those chargers that actually has 2 USB ports you can plug into. And so one of the other things you got to be careful for is if you buy one of these double ones and you're like, oh, hey, I've got the double charger and it says that 2.1 amps. Well, okay, that's good if you have one thing plugged in. But if you have 2 things plugged in, you're now charging back at that lower rate. And however, there's this whole thing where it's like you can get this double charger where it's like, oh, I'll buy a pack of 3 for like $15 or I don't know, $8, $10. It's really, really cheap. But then if you want to get one that actually charges multiple devices at that faster speed, it gets a little more expensive and it becomes to be, I don't know, $8 to $15 for a single double charger. That was poorly said, but one thing that can have 2 USB devices charging at that higher rate. In my opinion, though, it's worth spending a little bit more to get that faster charger because, if you come in and you need to charge your phone real quick before you go out somewhere, then you want it to charge fast, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's one of the things with recharging anything. It's always annoying to have to wait. It's fine. Like, it's why a lot of people just, charge it during their sleep so they don't have to think about this stuff. So there's options. But, when we're coming back to something like lighting in our house, like, because our house just runs itself and we usually don't think about the energy that we're using in it, but you could actually replace all of your light bulbs with something that was more energy efficient, might save yourself a little bit of money, but also it'd be kinder to the environment.
Yeah. And so there's also, saving that monthly power cost. So when it comes to that, so we talked about power here. So when it comes to lighting, another thing that you want to keep in mind is what's called lumens. And lumen is basically the unit for brightness. So how bright is the thing going to be? And so inherently, when you have this, this incandescent bulb versus an LED bulb, they're going to have different power usage. So as we mentioned before, LEDs are going to have much less power, but they can provide equivalent lumen, equivalent brightness. And so what you'll see on the packaging a lot of times is you'll see something like 60-watt equivalent. And that's saying, hey, if you are trying to buy an LED bulb to replace an incandescent bulb, then you are looking 60 watt is kind of like the standard light bulb in a house. So you're looking for that 60 watt equivalent. Even though that LED bulb may use something like, I don't know, 5 watts or 3 watts or something like that. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it uses a lot less power. So that's where the lumens number comes into play. Another thing when you're buying lights that you want to pay attention to is what's called color temperature. And yes, that's temperature just like, it's hot outside, it's cold outside. And I spelled that wrong, but you guys can deal with that. And it's measured in something called Kelvin, which is represented by a K. And that has a spectrum of, kind of just like our electromagnetic light spectrum. One end is kind of these warmer colors, like oranger kind of warmth feeling, and then the other end is kind of more of like a bluer color. And basically, if you ever get above, I think it's around 4,500 or 5,000.
Yeah.
What's that?
Daylight.
Yeah, that's considered daylight. So anything above that will kind of look like daylight.
And daylight really is pretty blue, which is kind of an interesting idea to think about. Is it oftentimes, because I think maybe we've been conditioned by incandescent bulbs, they give off kind of a warmer yellow glow, more similar to a candle or something, right? And so we get accustomed to this, and then all of a sudden you put in a daylight bulb into your house and you're like, whoa, this is so bright and so blue.
Right.
Like it has a kind of a more energizing effect on you.
And that's one of the nice things about LED versus some of the other types of bulbs is you get a little bit more control on how the space feels and what that light is like. And maybe you want to have that daylight lights for the area, maybe in your office or like times when you're doing stuff, you're active, but maybe in your room, you want to kind of keep that cooler or that warmer tone. And those, just like you like the vibe of it, you like the feel of it.
Yeah, and it's kind of dependent on several. When I used to run art galleries, we had lighting was a big issue. So we were always going for high wattage. We were going for certain colors, and the colors all had to match, right? Because you couldn't have overlapping blues and yellows because that actually discolors the art on the wall. Fluorescent lights have a whole problem with lighting as well, in that they sort of do a vibrating thing that when you're staring at pigments, it sort of seems to super saturate them and mute some colors, and you don't get the full range of shadows on them. So when you start getting into lighting, it can get really complicated depending on the purpose of it. So oftentimes we're talking about mood lighting, but of course in the gallery, the idea was that the art was supposed to stand out and the light wasn't supposed to be recognized, right? But if you do it wrong, then all anyone can, like, it kills the art and people pay attention to the lighting. So a lot of times lighting is one of those things we try to make invisible. We just want the ambiance to work.
Right. And because how the light is will affect how your eyes view the thing, right? And in this case, you're talking about paintings, and it's, arguably a lot more important. But in other cases too, like, all right, how are things lit when comparison to a screen that you're watching, whether that's a television or a computer monitor or a laptop or something like that? How those lights are may affect how much your eyes have to strain, how hard it is to see the thing. If it's a glossy screen, there are reflections coming from maybe the windows outside or bright lights you have in your house. I've definitely had an annoying time where I'm trying to watch TV or something, and I just see the whole light bulb from like one of the lamps, and it's just like right over like a character's face, and you're like, what's going on?
Why?
Right.
Yeah.
And one other thing that our viewer was talking about, which we're not going to get into today for the purposes of time, was, okay, they were putting out some really heavy duty lights outside, and they were like, oh, hey, I'm looking at this much wattage versus this much wattage. Do I need to worry about tripping a breaker? And we'll talk a little bit more about that another day, because I know you have a lot of experience with that dealing with your shop.
Yeah. There's only so many sort of plugs and sources you can put on a breaker, and breakers come in different. You can do 15s or you can go 20s, and you can sort of up the amperage based on your breaker and your systems. But even then, you don't want to be pulling too much through any certain circuit, and so it can get complicated. and there is some math on that, and there are some sort of best practices, and then it also comes down to how often you're going to be using every outlet that's on a circuit. I mean, it goes on and on, but it's kind of these are all good questions to ask. What is great is that we do have more energy efficient lights now. I think previously lighting might be able to blow your breaker. I don't know now.
Yeah, now probably not quite as much, but and that's where it comes back to that P equals IV equation. And that's when, a good rule of thumb is what uses a lot of power. Well, anything that generates heat is basically a lot of power, because what they're doing is they're literally converting electricity into heat. And so they're taking all of that energy, and if you know any physics stuff, it's about conservation of energy, and they're converting that energy into heat to keep you warm. Maybe you're using a curling iron, maybe you're using a microwave to cook your food, maybe you have an oven. These are just some things, or for example, like an appliance like a washer or a dryer, like those have motors that are moving lots of heavy clothes, and so those are the types of things that are going to have more power draw. And if you look at them, they're going to have a higher amperage and a higher power, and sometimes even a higher voltage in certain cases. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just thinking about when we did the shop. Then of course getting 220 power, getting higher voltage into the shop. Most of the time we're operating on 120. Interestingly enough, your car operates on 12 volts, right? And these little blocks operate on 5 volts, and so
and your computer, your inside of your computer and your phone, those are all operating on 5 volts.
And so it's kind of fascinating to see that there's sort of scales at which everything can go up, and then you go to 220, and then it's like everything takes a certain amount of amps, but certain motors actually pull less because anyway, we can go into it on another day. But when it comes to the lighting aspect, I'm really quite interested in whether or not we should go smart home. And that's one of the things that we should probably have another episode on, is like, how smart does your home get before it's really controlling you rather than you controlling it?
Yeah, there's a balance for sure.
Yeah.
But I will say that one of the things I've done within the last year has incorporated some more alternative lighting in our apartment, and I've enjoyed it a lot. I've gotten some of these LED strips that can be different colors, and they kind of it has 15 individual segments that you can program independently. And, to be honest, most of the time I just have them on some similar color, and it's not even like animated or flashing or anything like that, although it has that capability. But now whenever the sun goes down, I start to turn those lights on, and it kind of gives a different mood to the space. It makes it feel a little bit different. And so I've kind of enjoyed having that different type of lighting to help, it makes the house feel a little more fun, a little more cool for us to hang out in. And another way that we've done it, combining it with a little bit of the smarts, is I've set it up to where now when I'm waking up, I have these lights that are under my bed, one of these strips that go under my bed, they gradually turn on as it gets closer to my alarm. And so by the time my alarm goes off, these things are at like 85% brightness or something like that. So just another way to help gradually wake up my body instead of just having that one jolting alarm. It's like, all right, let's gradually wake you up. And then also when you're up, it's a little harder to turn back over and go to sleep when you have all these lights on. Not saying I still can't do it. I mean, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good at
practicing.
But it helps,
Yeah. No, I think all that's great. I'm big fan of the whole lighting thing, and just now starting to think more about the smart home thing. So that's all kind of fun. It's also a rabbit hole you can get caught up in. When it comes to the outdoor motion sensing lights, I've got several of those.
Cameras are involved in there too.
I've got some cameras. Like, it can go on and on.
Lightsabers.
Yeah, right. I've actually got
Laser
telekinetic rods that come from satellites down if somebody approaches my house. It's a whole
50
thing.
caliber snipers automatically shooting for you.
Yeah, that's actually just my neighbor Paul.
Yeah. He just like nods at you.
Yeah, he just nods. Yeah. Yeah, let's see. We probably need to wrap up a bit and get back to our challenge today. What are you thinking about for challenges?
Well, let's go ahead and recap what we talked about today and see what shakes out. So first off, we started off talking a little bit about time blocking, and we showed a little bit of visually what that can look like and how you could use a calendar program to do that. And one of the things that we'll show a little more in a later episode is we'll do some more examples of what those time blocks may look like and how you can resize them and move them around a little bit easier. But frankly, today I'm a little far from the screen, and we're gonna have to figure out a little different setup for us to do that. But we talked about how important time blocking can be and how you need to have those meetings that you set with yourself and that you protect that time. And guess what? It's up to you what that time is. And maybe that time for you is knitting. Maybe it's sleeping. Maybe it's reading. Maybe it's eating. Maybe it's work related. Maybe it's, spirituality related. But the whole point of time blocking is you have done a little bit of work in advance and said, hey, here are the things that are important to me in my life and that I recognize that I want to do, or at least aspirationally, I want to do to improve myself, to make myself a better person, to improve my life. Well, now I'm going to have that rubber meet the road and give it a time on my calendar where it's going to happen. And we talked about how that can force you to make those decisions and say, instead of, oh, I'm going to do all of those things tomorrow, it's like, okay, no, stop right now. Let's sit down with the calendar and say, oh, when am I going to do that? And then that forces yourself to be real. And then it's like, well, I've got to do this, and that's going to take about a half hour. And I'm going to do that. That's going to take 2 hours. And I'm going to do that. Well, I'd love to take Susie to the airport, but I just don't know how that's going to fit in there. And then be like, hey, Susie, like, I'd love to, but I've got my whole calendar already planned out for tomorrow, and I can't make that happen. And that's okay to do.
Yeah, it really is okay to turn down things.
Yeah.
and sometimes having that time block will help you sort of recognize what those things are, and also recognize what you're giving up when you do. And this is the other thing. Don't feel bad about yourself. Don't beat yourself up too much if you can't stick to the time blocking right away. I mean, the whole point is to try to create a system for yourself around whatever your priorities are. The world is going to intrude on that. That is the way of the world.
Yeah. And one of the main things I advise is, just sitting down and doing it. And if you don't time block anything else, time block at least one segment within your day to just review and plan. And that could be your time where you said, hey, what went well, what didn't go well, and then let me do the time blocking for the next day so I can see, oh, here's what we're doing, and here are the priorities. And then you do that every day, and then that'll also help you recognize patterns. It's like, hey, oh man, I've been really bad about doing my time blocking. Well, maybe I need to make sure that I have an alarm that tells me, hey, it's time to go. And I made that 5 minutes, but I should probably make it 15 so I give myself some time to wrap these things up before I have to transition on the next thing. And you'll figure out what those little things are for you. But yeah, I encourage you, and I think this is what we'll have as our challenge today, which is try time blocking. Right after this show, we're gonna go to our post-show music, and we're gonna give you guys 20 minutes again to do that. And basically, what the idea is, pull up your calendar, or pull out a piece of paper. This does not have to be a digital thing. And there are some arguments for having this be something outside of your norm, and then literally just a piece of paper or a sticky note that you carry around to remind yourself, like, hey, here are the things that I said I'm gonna do, and don't let it get distracted or hidden behind all of the other calendar stuff. Especially if you have a crazy calendar already and you're like, Reed, you're you're joking, right? Yeah. I can't do anything else with my calendar. Well, then maybe it's a piece of paper that says, all right, here are these priorities, and okay, I have these little windows in my day where I do have a little more control over my time. That piece of paper or this calendar, whatever it may look like for you, can help you prioritize during those times.
Yeah, I think that's the good thing to do. Just spend the next few minutes. Just, you don't have to fill up your entire day. Just block out a couple chunks, see how it works. If you like it, keep doing it. The other thing is that a lot of people do this and they really find it productive. So it makes me think that if I was doing it right, I would be more productive and I would find it more beneficial.
Yeah. And so, as Ryder was saying, very important to have a little bit of grace with yourself. If you're not doing it that well from the start, don't worry. Just keep going, keep trying. And that's why that's why I said have that one time block every day where you're making the time blocks and reviewing. Then that is the minimum goal right there. And if it's maybe once a day is too much for you, once a week, whatever works for you. But the main goal is to get started. And so that's your challenge for today. And we'll provide the time and space for you guys to do this right after this show. And the last part of the recap was we had another TITS episode, or another tips segment rather.
Yeah. So talked a little bit about lighting, different kinds of it. Started talking about power and electricity. And I think this will probably lead into more conversations about that.
Yeah, and we had just one quick little tidbit in there about using the power equation and how you can apply that knowledge to buying a cell phone charger and how that can help you find the one that's going to not only charge your device at its fastest capacity, but also if you have one with multiple ports, you and a friend or you and your spouse or significant other, you can be like, hey, I got that 2.0 on it for you, baby.
Ooh, wow.
Ooh, talk dirty to me.
Yeah, no, I got the Audi and the port block charger.
Yes,
Oh yeah.
exactly. What else do you need in life?
That's it.
What else do you need? Some good lighting.
Well, of course, mood lighting in the Audi.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, it has been a wonderful Friday. So let's just keep that train rolling. So everyone have a wonderful Friday, and we'll see you guys later.